And we'd like to welcome you back to another edition of the Outside 50 podcast presented by usfootynews.com. As always, I'm your host, Rick Schiavone from LA, and we've also got Tara Silke from Denver and Ben Martinez from Austin. How you going, guys?
Going great, Rick.
Yeah, doing really well. Excited for another podcast.
Good to hear. And yeah, I'm stoked too. We're heading back to the East Coast today. On the line, we've got Colin Smith, who is the president of the Boston Demons Footy Club. G'day, Colin.
G'day, everyone. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, we're really excited to have you on board. And things are gradually reopening on this side of the country. How's everything going over in Boston?
We've been struggling with how to answer that question, to be frank. We have a very active board group, and what's been interesting for Boston this past year, prior to everything happening with COVID, is we've actually started to really form a close bond with the Portland, Maine club, and start to have more satellite individuals who are in Rhode Island, Vermont, and other places located in New England. So both coordinating and figuring out how to get back on the pitch now that it's finally warm enough in the past couple of days has been a little bit of a challenge.
Yeah, I'm sure. And that's a really cool development that you guys have. We've been trying, or unsuccessfully trying, I might add, to connect with all the newer clubs that have sprung up here in the USAFL in the past few years. But Maine is one that's still on the list. So if those blokes are listening, hopefully they'll be able to finally do an interview with us. But no, that's great. Like, Portland is obviously a pretty close drive for you guys. I've been up traveling through that part of the country once or twice. So that's really exciting. I know Vermont has a handful of guys that are interested. They haven't officially formed a club, but there's definitely a lot of people who want to play over there. And it's great to see because, again, New England's a compact place. There's a lot of small regional towns, whether it's upstate New York or Vermont or Maine. Like there's a good amount of talent up there. So it's great to see that you guys kind of have a little nucleus, not just of veteran or experienced footy players in Boston, but elsewhere in New England as well, plus Quebec.
Yeah, exactly. I would say the kind of nucleus and the close-knit nature of the American Northeast has really allowed us to really kind of be in better touch with, Montreal, Philadelphia, Baltimore, DC. These are all places that we can reasonably drive to in a weekend. DC on not too busy, compact traffic filled evening is, a 7 or 8 hour drive. That's reasonable for us. So more and more we're trying to make sure we sort of stay locally with our games, not push ourselves to have too many flights in a given season. And right now with COVID, I think we're sort of grappling the question with what is people's comfort level with slowly starting to do practices again. Do we want to do small groups of 4 or 5? Do we want to do bigger groups of 10? And I think it's going to ultimately come down to individual players' comfort levels, whether or not they kind of want to wait a little bit longer for a little bit more okay from the local or state governments, or if we are just dying to hit the fields, this weekend.
Yeah, that's very true. And I reckon it's going to be the same, like on a club to club basis. Like, the reality is right now that, most of us are starting to do like informal trainings, or, Tara's really proud of the Zoom workouts she's doing up in Denver with the guys and girls over there. But the reality is some clubs are going to be comfortable with traveling, whether it's by plane or by road, and some clubs won't, and with regionals out of the question right now, I think you're going to see a lot of different approaches that different clubs have. Again, thankfully, we've been relatively lucky here on the West Coast in terms of, the number of cases being less significant than the East Coast. But at the same time, we don't want to push our luck too much. So we're just trying to, reach out to people. And I'm sure, since we already had the schedule out, I'm sure we'll be talking to people, from Golden Gate or San Diego or OC, all the big regional teams, see where they're at, if they feel comfortable traveling if we feel comfortable traveling, if we have the numbers, if they have the numbers. There's a lot of variables in play, but you just kind of have to put a bold face on it and do what you can.
Yeah, 100% agree. I think, for us right now, the biggest question is, when can we safely go back and start practicing, followed by when can we actually safely have our first either metro game or full game with whether that be Maine or one of the more local clubs. And the big question on our minds too is, will we be able to scrape together a nationals tournament, and will players actually want to go out and play?
Yeah, that's for sure. We're all kind of hoping and wishing for nationals to get on the board. But maybe to take it back a little bit, so how did you get involved with footy yourself? And what is your history with the Boston Demons? How did you become president of the club?
Sure. So my first intro to footy was 4 years ago. A former coworker of mine, by the name of Jeremy Hum, he actually started working at my former company after I left, but we became friends. Aussie out of Western Australia originally, said, "Hey, I actually play this crazy sport. You should come out and try it." I learned later that he had done a 4-year stint with the West Coast Eagles and 1 year with the Richmond Tigers. And so after I think 3 or 4 practices tops, and really not understanding what out on the full meant yet, I drove up to Montreal for my first game ever, where he called up a buddy of his, who had lived in Toronto, to come play with us. And so Dan Jackson from the Richmond Tigers was playing to my left, and Jeremy Hum on forward of me. And so my first experience was getting a pass from a ex-AFLer and then absolutely getting creamed on the field. I've been playing ever since.
Wow.
Awesome.
Yeah. When you said West Coast and Richmond, he played a bunch of years with West Coast and a couple years with Richmond. I was like, wait, that's not Ben Cousins. So who is it? But
Yeah.
yeah, no, that ironically, I've met Dan Jackson as well. For those of you who don't know, again, longtime Richmond player. He currently coaches up in Canada, if I remember correctly, and he's done a lot of great work with AFL Ontario. I know you mentioned that briefly, but yeah, he came to training in LA because he was just like passing through town for a few days. I think this was a couple of years ago when I was still relatively new to footy as well, and I was like, oh my god, an ex AFL player, I gotta get a selfie with him. But no, Dan is great, and as it turned out, our team captain at the time, Justin Kenna, JK is a massive Richmond supporter. He knew Dan through I assume mutual friends back in Melbourne. I can't remember, but yeah. So it was awesome to have a brief training session with Dan, and that's awesome that you got a chance to interact with him a little bit too. He's a good bloke.
Yeah, he's a wonderfully nice guy. Friends with him on Facebook. He's been in touch with him a few times, off and on over the years, and just a really nice guy who is super passionate about footy and sports in general, and happy to just kind of share his passion with everyone else.
That's wonderful. And then how did you become the president then of the club? So you haven't been playing for too long, and now you're the president of your entire club. That's awesome.
So I think on my second year playing, so this is actually technically my 5th season. This would be the technical start of my 5th season. I think on my 3rd season, I opted to sort of help around with games and organization a little bit more. And then last year we had our, one of our last president had to undergo double knee surgeries at the same time, and basically after being appointed at the end of the last season, came back in January, February and said, guys, this just really isn't going to work. And we had to do a last minute switch. So they asked me to step up, and luckily, like any good organization, my vice president, our secretary, the board members at large have been amazingly good at sort of helping me out and really, picking up slack where it's needed. And we've really had a dedicated board, really meant to push forward. And we'd also, in my 3rd season, gone without a coach, which we managed to get 2 new coaches last year, Matt Hook, and those 2 have really been able to pull the team together and provide guidance as well. There's people who organize and there's people who lead, and having those two as leaders on the field have really made a huge difference in on my ability to sort of organize everything.
That's great to hear. And kind of going off of that, Colin, you guys are obviously in Division Two. You've been pretty competitive at regionals and nationals lately, and obviously you've got some pretty good sides in D2 right now. OC, Minnesota, a handful of other clubs. What do you guys think is the key to, again, assuming that there is nationals this year, assuming that it's still a go? What do you guys think is the key to getting a D2 flag?
Yeah, I think, again, good coaches, 100% a huge critical component to that. People to, really come together and be a single voice on the field is huge. There's always going to be a few key players who stand up as leaders on the field and really marshal, organization from the back or the front that really help that move forward. And a huge component too is actually the camaraderie of the team. So before, I mentioned we had really spent a long time playing with Maine and merged with them at this year's nationals to win the D3 flag. And, I think we have a good shot at, winning the D2 flag if we spend enough time practicing together, getting to know how each other play and, really spending time together as a club. So I think, all the right components are there. We have the skill set. I think, there's the people there who have the drive to win and, don't want to just be a beer league team. So if all that is able to come together, I think we have a good shot at nationals again this year if it goes forward.
Yeah, it seems like you guys kind of have a formula that works in terms of just having consistently good numbers, a strong culture to where the newbies, the American newbies, can come in and feel welcome. And also, you guys are just a fun team to watch. I've gotten a chance to, you know, when I'm bored in quarantine and it's my day off work, go on YouTube, search the highlights for, regionals or nationals of years past. And yeah, you guys have a pretty solid group of guys, and hopefully you guys can rebuild some of that momentum recruiting wise once you're finally able to train again. Because obviously Boston's a big city. I assume there's a decent sized Aussie population over there, and it's just kind of a multicultural city in general. So it's good to have a sport like that that can kind of bring people together and people from all different backgrounds who just want to give it a crack.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, every city has its own dynamics, but I find there's the Aussie population that comes to Boston tends to fit in 1 to 2 categories. Either it's, slightly older aged individuals who are being transferred in their jobs. So you're often seeing people in, the finance and tech sectors, or it's people coming out of academia. Boston is famous for just having a massive number of colleges and universities in a very small localized space, having as a consequence of that, a huge entrepreneurial industry, a huge tech industry, a huge finance industry, a huge medical industry. So, there's a lot of guys on our team with PhDs. There's a lot of guys in our teams who are, vice presidents of their particular region, having been transferred from overseas. So, you get a lot of very interesting, diverse mix of people who have been really driven to come to the city for one reason or another. What's sad about it is there's also a tendency for them to leave rather quickly as well. So I've made a lot of good friends who are only here for a year or two and then they depart.
Yeah, they just can't handle the snow, I guess.
That's a huge part of it. We are shut down from November through March due to the snow. I've got to assume Denver's probably a little bit the same, Tara, but for us, it's there's certain months where maybe if we're lucky, we'll play a little bit of indoor, but most of the time we just take the winter off.
Yeah, you got to get creative a little bit sometimes. We talked about that a little with, I think it was Martin Coventry from Portland, because they're in a different position. It's pouring rain over there almost every day of the winter. So they kind of have to get creative in terms of indoor training. But yeah, I mean, you guys, again, you mentioned the academia and how you get a lot of blow-ins, people who are just there briefly for school, but there's a chance that you never know. Sometimes they might stick around. In fact, a former teammate of mine in LA, Joe Silvio, he actually first picked up footy in Boston. He was getting his master's, I think it was finance, accounting, something like that, at Boston College. And he just managed to kind of find the demons when he was over there. And he played for the Dragons for a while. He's Air Force, so he moves around a decent amount. And now he's down in Florida. So, but he always spoke very highly of he only played a couple seasons with Boston, but he always spoke very highly of the guys over there. And I'm pretty sure he's still in touch with a lot of them.
Yeah, I think that speaks to another aspect of this too, which is what got me into footy and what's kept me playing has been a huge part of that, community of guys who I've gotten to know over the years. I now have friends who've moved to Europe, back to Australia, into other parts of the city. Aaron Tenenbaum was one of our players, now plays for Houston, and has designed Houston's past their new jumpers and things like that. And we're in talks with him about possibly designing our new jumpers. One of our old players now plays for Baltimore, and so having these connections allows us to on the few times I get to travel for work, I've gone and played with Houston. I've gone to a few other cities and just met up for guys for a quick kick. That's a very interesting type of camaraderie for people you often have never met before. Going online to say, hey, who can I go play with or watch this game? I've watched footy matches with guys I've never met before in Chicago because I happened to be there for a few days. That's a really interesting dynamic that I think is one of the reasons I think this sport keeps growing, is because we do have an amazing culture, and we absolutely have it in Boston, but I've absolutely seen it in other cities as well.
I'm sure. Yeah. And it's great to have that, like you said, camaraderie. There's nothing else like it, in my opinion.
Yeah, you guys have been around since 1997, so you're one of the older clubs in the USAFL. Do you think that kind of helps contribute as well to your culture and being able to maintain all these players and have that kind of cohesive team just being around for that long of time?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think, having been around that, if we had been a 5-year-old club as opposed to a 15-plus-year-old club, I think that would still have a very similar impact. But, we do have a couple players who've been around that, since then, or close to that long. And I think that does bring, a real, spirit and camaraderie sense to the rest of the team, because it's, we are also happen to be the only, this might be still, this might have changed, but last I looked, we're the only Demons in the USAFL. There's a couple teams who are the Tigers, there's a couple teams who are the Crows, but no one else has decided to pick up the moniker of the Demons. So I think, we feel a sense of pride about that. And I think, again, having the close-knit sense of New England and pulling in players from other locations has really kept that spirit alive too.
Oh, well, don't jinx it, Colin. Now every team's going to want to be the Demons. Come on.
Well, let's knock on wood. Let's hope it lasts at least a couple more seasons.
Sounds good.
So, Colin, with that camaraderie, talk us through nationals. I've been fortunate, to play playing them, and as Rick and Tara have. You go into that tournament. I've seen your results historically. You had some great results. I was looking through those earlier today, and you're coming into the tournament. You've got a group with the likes of Sacramento, my boys Austin, at Austin, and you've also got I think from memory you had the Outlaws as well there. Walk us through kind of the preparation leading up to it and right through that, because it was a close group. I mean, that was a hard fought group, and I'd love to get your thoughts on how that camaraderie got you over the line.
Yeah, no, I think we did a great job of really understanding what various players' skill sets were and playing to our advantage. There's very much a pace of the game that can get out, go away from you very fast and come back quickly if you play it right. And I think in all of those games, we figured out how to find our pace of game really quickly, make space for the players who had the long arms and the great reach. And, for some of the, players who can't run as fast or do as well, find that good position where they really know how to be. And again, the camaraderie that we keep coming back to was a huge component of that, of, some of the more experienced players sort of helping, marshal others onto the field of where they wanted them to go, how to create that space and go forward. And, some of those games, especially the last one against Columbus that we won, was kind of by the skin of our teeth. We kind of got the advantage, but I think by the end we were very much gassed and sort of holding them at bay until the clock ran out. Had that been a longer game, things might have gone differently. And, we always have to keep that in mind. But, for a short period of time, you just have to hold your ground. And I think our ability to, really trust in other players that, the advice that they're giving us is worth taking really allowed us to find the locations we needed to be and keep the ball in, the opponent's half of the field more often than not.
Oh yeah, I've been in that boat personally, like those slugfest kind of matches, particularly if the weather's bad. Now, obviously in LA, that's not too much of a problem normally, but when I was playing in Australia, when the weather's unpredictable in Melbourne during the winter, those games turn into dogfights. Sometimes literally, because the adrenaline is just so much more heightened when it's you know 3 goals to 2 goals at halftime. Like if it's a really gritty, down in the dirt kind of game. So those can definitely be nerve wracking, and you better believe you're going to feel those ones in the morning, even more so than usual. But it definitely, at the risk of sounding cliche, it builds character as a club. Those types of games are almost bonding moments. As long as you win. But either way, it's a pretty interesting perspective to have because all footy matches are taxing physically and mentally, but when it's a really tight game and you don't know who's going to pull through, it's when champions are made.
Yeah. What was unfortunate for me in nationals is I was about 5 minutes into our first match when I just took a misstep and literally popped every single ligament in my right ankle. And, it was the type of thing where my players carried me off the team, got me a set of crutches, and then I basically played the role of coach, sort of second to our two coaches that we already had. But it's interesting where even in a case like that, they were able to say, okay, this obviously isn't a good. We're now another player down, and everyone else was able to sort of solve the problem, put in new move around players into the right positions, and account for that really quickly. No one ever hopes for that to happen, but being able to make the right decisions for the rest of the players to make the right decisions and fill that void in a good way really helped us have success on the field anyway.
Yeah, I agree with that, Colin. You certainly had great structure and just your leadership on the ground. The chemistry of the team in every game you played was really evident, and no doubt then was reflected in those results. So see some big things coming ahead with that kind of chemistry and structure you've got there, and obviously, like you said, the culture, the leadership, having that such a critical point to long-term success. So you've got all the ingredients there, for a big year this year as well.
Yeah, I was just pissed that I didn't get to play against Austin.
There you go.
Well, who are you most looking forward to playing? If we have a nationals, are you looking to make sure that you retain your winning streak with Columbus there? Are you looking to look forward to other teams to play?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Columbus is historically been a hard hitting rival for us. Prior to this season, we hadn't played Chicago in a while, and they're a big rivalry. And to be honest, one of our most fun competitors has always been Montreal. The Demons versus the Saints has just an iconic ring to it. And for the last couple of years, we've actually met about halfway and played them in Burlington, Vermont. So we rent out a field there and then go out drinking for the evening afterwards. And that has just been an absolute blast. I think it's interesting because had this been before a pandemic, I think my answer might be different. But I think, we're just so desperate to get out and have some of just the regular season games at this point. We're much less anxious to sort of go and hit old rivals than we are just to play our friends.
Oh yeah, I'm not surprised. But again, it's great that you have those teams within an easy drive, and hopefully the competition will resume sooner rather than later. And once they open up the Canadian border, but But yeah, no, that's exciting. And again, like I said, Div 2, you've got so many quality sides there, and I think you guys can go toe to toe with anyone. On a slightly different topic, this may or may not be an elephant in the room kind of topic, but on previous episodes, we've talked about footy clubs in different cities reaching out to rugby clubs or Gaelic clubs, and specifically because Boston and the Irish are synonymous for better or worse. But I assume there's a couple of good Gaelic clubs. Have you guys reached out to them and done some international rules matches, or?
In my 4 years going on 5, we actually have not played an international rules match here. We've got 2 players who are former Gaelic players, and 2 pints of Guinness later, and you can't understand them, but are great blokes to see in the field, and really good friends now. But I think the downside to having a really well established sort of Gaelic footy community and rugby community is it actually makes it a little harder to pull guys away. I think if you have the occasional 1 or 2 teams, the diversity and the ability for them to play a different sport is a little more enticing. But the really long-standing rugby clubs that have been in Boston for years are really competitive in the Northeast. And again, a lot of them spin out of the academia that you have all over New England. I think has made it a little bit harder for us in some respects to recruit rugby or footy players. The vast majority of players we find joining us are either Aussie expats who look us up actively or are friends of friends. That makes up 95+% of our new recruits any given season.
That makes sense. And yeah, like it's funny because here in LA, we kind of have that a little bit of a rocky relationship. A few years ago, when the LA Lady Dragons, the women's side was just starting off, we were looking to kind of poach netballers or poach female Gaelic players with mixed success. The Gaelic clubs weren't too keen on that, but yeah, I mean, with poaching players, it's a bit of a minefield. But we have had some positive developments. The Culver City Cougars, one of our Dragons players, James Drummond, he played with them last year and actually won nationals, or their version of Gaelic nationals. And also another one of my teammates, Sam Murphy from the Revos. He's a personal trainer, and he actually frequently teaches like cheap classes at parks in LA. And he had a few months ago, before everything shut down, he had the entire Culver City Cougars Gaelic team do some yoga, which I thought was a hilarious image. And he was just like, "Oh yeah, I was just chatting with these Irishmen who are just casually doing yoga in the park, and it was it was a good time." So and they've reached out to us in the past, just like doing social events together, because that can be a good way to kind of diffuse the tension. Because again, poaching players is a sensitive issue. I'm sure we would feel the same way if they were trying to do the same. But they were just reaching out to us. This was a couple of years ago, just being like, "Hey, we're both foreign market sports. We're both clubs that need financial support and need helping hands from other people in the community. So why not get together and do something?" And hopefully something like that can eventuate in the near future. But either way, it's definitely good to have other clubs that are kind of in a similar boat.
Yeah, absolutely. I think from one of the things I've wanted to do most, and that's been sort of one of the long shot dreams of the Demons for several years now, is it's been in the back of our minds that Harvard University for years has had a professorship chair from Australia. So once a year, a new professor comes from Australia to sit and guest lecture at Harvard. Now, that in and of itself isn't really advantageous, but what we're hoping eventually happens is to leverage the person in that role to let us use Harvard's facilities. And our ultimate goal would be to actually have regionals or nationals be hosted on Harvard's grounds, right on the Boston-Cambridge border. But with COVID in place, that seems even less likely. So we'll have to wait a couple seasons before we start broaching that subject again.
Yeah, adding to the fact that college campuses can be a little bit stingy when it comes to using their facilities, especially a school as serious and no nonsense as Harvard. But hey, fingers crossed. Hopefully that happens. And another thing I wanted to mention briefly, again, obviously we focus mostly on U.S. footy here on the podcast, but recently we had a chance to talk to Patty Smallwood down in Bogota, Colombia. and talking about potential growth of footy in our respective continents. Have you, since you guys are on the East Coast, and flights to the UK or Ireland or even continental Europe can't be super pricey? Have you been able to talk with the guys about maybe doing an international match if you had the funds?
I think overall the idea, everyone would be absolutely open to the idea. Right now, the better progress we made, and again, this kind of stems out of our relationship with Maine, is they have historically played Halifax. So one of the things we're trying to foster too is actually being able to play Halifax, either in Halifax or Portland, Maine. Possibly pull the Montreal club in that we have a good relationship with already. And we know Toronto has a quite robust league, so getting in touch with some of the teams there to, either meet halfway in the middle in upstate New York, Vermont, or some location like that would be awesome. So as of now, most of our ideas have been really centered on, expanding our relationship with Canadian clubs. But, given the fact that, we might start opening things up, and it might not be out of the realm of possibilities to have cheap flights to the UK or anywhere in Europe, that would be amazing for us to be able to do. And we would absolutely love to play an international footy team and host them for a few days in either our city or be hosted in theirs.
That would be really awesome if you could pull it off, no question. And also, again, considering Boston is a pretty spread out area and there's a lot of urban sprawl with the suburbs and everything, have you guys considered maybe branching out a bit more? Because obviously you have Portland and Vermont, but you guys also have like Nashua, New Hampshire, Providence, Rhode Island, very close by. Have you been able to kind of dip your toes in the water over there and see if there's any interest to get like a Metro League going there as well?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So we already have, one of our board members at large lives in Providence, Rhode Island, and is from Adelaide and a huge Crows supporter there. And I guarantee you, he's not going to a single pub and not recruiting. But and at the same time, we've got players who are in New Hampshire. We've got the main club sort of already established. There's a few players out of Vermont. So what we're really trying to do is form sort of a cohesive network, and then just try and get as many people to come play as possible. It is entirely our intention to band together with Maine again at nationals, and in reality, that's going to be much more of a New England club than it is a Maine, Massachusetts club. More and more, the term Boston Demons is becoming a bit of a misnomer. We're really more of a New England team overall. So we are slowly having to address the naming issue. But for now, if we could have the numbers to do Vermont versus New Hampshire versus Maine versus Boston, I guarantee you everyone would love to have that mini tournament go on. So right now, I think it's more a matter of really finding the numbers in each individual location. The reality is Vermont and New Hampshire are just much less dense than Portland, Maine, and Boston, Massachusetts are. So if we can get the numbers, we will absolutely do it. I think there's always and I'm interested to hear your guys' thoughts on the issue. There's always a balance between when do you split one big club into two. I know DC, Baltimore recently has done that. I know to a certain extent, some of the larger cities like LA, Austin, and Denver have done that as well. And so we're right at that tipping point where it's been easier for us to really try more combining with Maine than it has been to try and really call ourselves two teams. It means better practices on weekends, more numbers, more people to rely on at nationals. For me personally, I wouldn't be the last say in this, but it would be my vote that the day we rock up to nationals with two separate fully manned teams, one at a higher division and one at a lower, that's the day we really ought to start talking about separating into individual clubs.
I can see it already. The New England Demon Cats.
So we're in the early stage processes of designing the somewhat fictitious but somewhat serious Demon Cats logo, which we launch probably in a couple months. One of our amazing designers, if anyone's listening who wants a designer to help them with jumper ideas, Sarah Muscarello used to play for the Lady Demons. designed our old gear and is now helping us design a Demon Cats shirt for the clubs to wear.
That sounds like a lot of fun, actually. I think that'd be great for you guys to split off. I know it's so difficult for clubs to like try to figure out that. Denver struggles with that. Some years we have like way too many players. Well, not way too many. You can never have way too many players, but you have enough to like field multiple teams. So we always wonder, should we break apart and do more metro leagues and then have it the umbrella to the Denver Bulldogs? But you never know like what the right option is. And some years you have more, some years you have less. So it's a hard road to kind of judge that. But you were talking about how you would play these other clubs and teams, and a lot of those are smaller clubs and teams that just have men's teams. So, how are the Lady Demons kind of working on their growth and development, and how are you guys working on getting games for that side of your club?
Sure. No, we've had sort of our, from a number standpoint, ups and downs with the Lady Demons. But when I first started, I think there was a core group of maybe 8 to 15 women who were really great. Many of the more veteran players had moved away, and I think that a little bit caused the team to sort of fall by the wayside. And there's always a little bit of up and down with popularity within the clubs of who comes to play and who doesn't. But we've always had at least 5 to 10 people who want to play. And what I've always found sort of amazing about the women's clubs, especially in places like Boston, where you might not have a full 20 people to field a full team, is they just have amazing camaraderie, binding with other clubs. So I know that they have sort of amazing relationships with New York, Philadelphia, DC to, make sure that they all play together. This past season, we had both New York and Philly up to Boston to play. And basically the women all combined to play one game as well at the end. And I think, a couple of the men stepped in to play just to round out numbers at the end. But, the reality is that if we had just moved the goalposts a little bit further to make it a slightly more small field for the numbers we had, it would have been fine. And so what I always find amazing is to see that the women's team are always so good at sort of binding together and coming together for nationals. In regards to how the recruiting is going, I think it's always been an interesting, process. I think there's a lot of women who see it and immediately are drawn to the sport, and then there's others who are more hesitant to it. We've had actually, I'd say, sort of more guys pulling in their female friends to come play than the women sort of recruiting, and that's just I think really a consequence of the fact that we just have a larger number of men's players. But I think what's been great about it is, for the most part, I think we do co-ed practices. We're, always encouraging everyone to come out and, treat everyone fairly and practice together. And that, again, sort of has really allowed us to have a good team that has a good relationship with both men and women.
Yeah, that's a huge key to growth overall when it comes to the USAFL. Most of the best clubs in the country right now have a really good men's and women's side. So that's definitely a big factor in terms of positive growth. Well, Colin, we really appreciate you stopping by today, and hopefully we can reconnect with you further down the track once the season finally begins. And yeah, you guys are on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all that stuff, right?
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, Boston Demons Australian Football Club on all platforms, or?
Yeah, I believe so. And if you type Boston Demons USAFL into Google, the various platforms will pop up pretty quickly, and you can find us. So for anyone out there in the New England area who wants to come out and give it a try, feel free to reach out, and we'll get back to you shortly. And we'd love to have you on the field.
Sounds good. Sounds like a wicked smart plan.
Exactly.
I can't believe it took us that long to make a Boston joke.
I know. I think when I realized things had gotten to Boston was when they actually had the street construction signs say "Stay wicked far apart" written everywhere. And I kid you not, I've seen at least 3 of them. So it's we live up to the stereotype: Dunkin' Donuts, Patriots football, cold weather, and Boston Demons.
Exactly. Well, that was great.
Excellent, Colin.
Thank you so much, Colin.
Cheers.
Thanks, everyone.
Outside 50 is brought to you with the help of Play Aussie USA. Play Aussie is the only place in the USA you can buy the famous Sharon football, a proud sponsor of the USAFL. Visit them at playaussie.com.